In order to better come up with projected ownership of stacks, which is what I'm trying to do, is instead of having ownership sum, can we just multiply everything? And I know we've done this in the past, so we ran a few examples, and I'm just gonna give you what the answers to these examples were. Multiplying is actually much better. Much better than saying, you know, NC is going to be 10% or 9% or 8% owned in a tournament. It is, when you think about the actual 4 or 5 that you're going to play specifically from one team, that number is drastically lower, like extremely lower. And as a matter of fact, if we were to get those 4 players, say I did the first baseman, second baseman, third baseman, and one of the outfielders, and I were to multiply all their projected ownership, that would be a way better indication as to how owned that combination is going to be. A couple things that are wrong that I've seen in the industry that I think are wrong, and the more I research it, are wrong completely. Something like Osimo's tool, right? And I love Osimo, I love the content, I love the projections, I love the ownership, I love everything. But it obviously could always get better. So if I were to say, and this is a great way to put it, if I were to say NC is going to be 10%, because everyone uses the top stacks tool. So let me see if I could actually bring this up. Let's say he's in the top stacks tool for whatever that is. And I don't know if you guys have seen this before. Perfect. So I have it here. Let's say, and for those, I just went to KBO, I went to the top stacks tool. You go down and see how he puts it is Doosan, the percentage of them to be the top stack is 26%. Value, I don't know how many people have looked at it, but how owned they're going to be is also 26%. Couple things wrong with this information, right? Because Doosan is a team of 9 players, right? You can't stack 9 players. You're only stacking 5 or 4 for the most part, right? And depending on which 4 you stack, that is drastically different, right? So take this as an example real quick. And I'm gonna try to explain it the best way I can. Let's say if you were to go into FC, you just click, I wanna stack Doosan and I wanna stack 5 of them. And because of how pricing and projections work and who you could fill around them and the top projected pitchers at the time or that day, you, for the most part, the most optimal way of stacking Doosan, and I'm just hypothetically speaking here, is 2, 3, 4, 7, and 9, right? Let's just hypothetically say, because the 7 and 9 are really cheap for their what their value is going to be. 2, 3, 4 are fantastic, the highest projections, but then you need the highest projected pitcher, which costs a little bit more today, and you can't fit in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of all that stuff, right? And that is the optimal way, and that's what a lot of people are stacking. Believe it or not, the majority of this 26%, whether they use FC or not, or labs or RG or whatever, since projections are always similar, you're always going to get something very close to the same 5 there, right? And if you wanted to play instead 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as your 5-man stack, that's actually going to come out way lower owned than, say, the default 5 that everyone's running because it's optimal because of pricing and projection or whatever. So when we look at this and say Doosan's going to be 26% owned, I'm going to fade Doosan. Well, a better way of doing this is, how about if I want to stack 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 instead of the 2, 3, 4, 7, 9, let's say I multiplied the number 1's hitters, because since the number 1 hitter is not in the optimal 5 for Doosan, he is actually a little bit lesser owned than everyone else in the lineup, even though he's still a great player. He just costs a lot, let's say. So I would multiply the 5% owned that we think the number 1 hitter is going to be, plus the number 2, 3, 4, 5. We multiply them all together and we'll get some number that is drastically lower than 26%, right? Like it's not even going to be close to 26%, which is different. And you could run these exercises in lineup study. What we did was we went back and said, if I were to stack Doosan's 1 through 5, what are their projected ownership before the slate, obviously? What are their projected ownership, and can I multiply them to figure out how much of the tournament should be playing this if I were to do this correctly? And what we found was, after a few different tries at this, not just Doosan, multiple teams, multiple slates, that is actually a very, very good way to find out how many lineups are going to have that exact combination. It's actually very, very close. And there were even some where they were perfect. You know, there were actually some that were so perfect it was scary. So, and obviously there were some that were like within a percent or two, somewhere in 3%, but they were surprisingly pretty accurate. And I know we've had this formula down packed for a really long time. It's just obviously hard to implement, but to blindly say Doosan or KIW or whatever is going to be 26 or 15 or 12, I want to play the 1 through 5. I'm not interested in every single person or what the optimal stack is going to be. I want to play the highest projected. I want to have one gap. This is where we start getting it. I want to have one gap stacks where I just skip one hitter in the 5 that I'm going to use. And then I want to know the ownership of those guys. And then I want to translate it to how much maybe the field is going to have, and should I be playing them more, at least that 5. And that is where I think eventually, as products start evolving, as models start evolving, as companies like us and FC start evolving and giving this info out, that's where I think eventually we're going to get. Every industry gets to a point where there's so many products coming out, there's so much information coming out, that little by little as the years go on, everything gets much more efficient. Just you find out way more, you find out things that you didn't know before. We get close to computers almost. And I learned this from gaming, because now we're at a point where players are so darn good, it's almost scary. I think eventually we're gonna get to that level, not just in sports betting, in DFS, and anything gambling related. In poker, we're already there. People are making moves as close to a computer and how perfect a computer would play. Pretty crazy to think. Could you thumb those top 5 guys to have a better chance of getting them in the crunch? Yeah, but you'd also find that some guys that are just 2,000, 2,500, especially when we get to MLB, they're almost always, no matter how much you thumbs up other guys, are still gonna come up in those stacks, which is why they're always so highly owned. If you remember in MLB, the guys that were the highest owned in MLB were never the highest projected. It was never Mookie Betts. It was never JD Martinez. It was never the Astros. It was never those guys. It was always the Jeff Mathis 2K playing in Coors, batting 8th. You know, those were always the highest owned. It was never Trevor Story and whatever. No, it was always the 2K catcher on the good team. Maldonado for the Astros when the Astros were playing, I don't know, whoever, against a bad pitcher. It was always the 9th hitting catcher. That was 2,000. You know, so the play is so strong when you think about it, because you can sacrifice the catcher spot for someone that's really cheap, is on a decent team that's projected to score a lot. That way you can pay up at another spot and turn the third baseman, instead of having, I don't know, Miguel Rojas or something, now you have Alex Bregman, which the difference is 5 points in projection compared to the difference of, 2 points at the catcher spot. And that's why you have those guys being so highly owned. So I don't know. One sec though, some prefer to use Doosan but would like to leverage by playing the bottom of the order guys. Sure, that's fine. I was just getting to how you can accurately predict ownership a little bit better, especially in stacking sports. I think just blindly saying Doosan or SK or Kia or whatever are this highly owned, don't do this. Or they're 28% owned, consider fading them. Well, how much is the top 5? Because that's why I feel like playing. And that would be a better indication of what you need to do with your stacks. It's a pretty cool way to look at things, and you'd be surprised as to how accurate this could be. And I think that's eventually where stuff like this is going to go. We're always going to be getting better as an industry as time passes, as new things are developed. It's different. We were just talking about it yesterday, and it's one of those where you can find the perfect strategy eventually, I'd say. Like, give it a couple years, and I think you're going to be like, well, we're going to find out to the T how much of each team we should be playing, and it's going to get pretty scary. Have you backtested against real results to see if aggregating is way off? Or is this a projection on trying to hone in on which combos are going to be used the most? Aggregating is way off. There's nothing, we're not aggregating anything here. It's just how to better. So for now, we've used ownership sum a lot, meaning you add the ownership of the players in your lineup to see the overall ownership of the whole lineup, but that really doesn't do much. You're just adding. And the better way to say how owned is a lineup going to be, because ideally that's what really matters, right? Like, how different is your lineup from others? And you technically don't want to hold hands at all. I think this is a better way of doing that. That's what I define as aggregating, and then using the average, removing 0%. Aggregating is like an average, homie. I don't know. Either way, it's something we were thinking about, and I like what I saw from... I want to do more. I want to go back weeks and try this. A lot of weeks. But is this a better way to predict the field in a zero-sum game? I think so. I really do think so.